Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Conflict in Bosnia and Herzegovina is not inevitable, and yet today we find ourselves closer than ever to conflict in the Balkans. We see the rise of hatred, division, sectarianism and the ugly beast of nationalism. We see fears rising and still raw wounds being ripped open, and that is why I have called for today's debate. Because I believe that each of us in this place has one common responsibility as parliamentarians, and that is to protect our nation. But we also share the responsibility to seek to prevent loss of life and to uphold human rights. And with the resolve of once stalwart partners now in question, now more than ever, Britain and we in this place must stand up and be counted. Over 26 years ago, the same hatred, the same sectarianism and the same nationalism brought bloodshed to Bosnia. Over 8,000 Muslim men and boys were massacred, women were systematically raped, and the lives of more than 100,000 people were taken in a war led by greed and inhumanity. In that war, 57 British soldiers were murdered. I stand here today because of that loss of life, those murders and the attempted extermination of the Bosniak people, because it cannot be repeated, and because those voices who were stolen deserve for us to learn from that silence. We are here today because peace in Bosnia is under threat. But conflict is not inevitable, and this House can make a difference. Deterrence diplomacy can make a difference. And today we seek to raise our voices to help prevent that loss of life and to uphold human rights and peace. Because Britain and this House have that opportunity to prevent history from repeating itself. Now, 26 years ago, the international community secured a fragile truce. The Dayton Peace Agreement was signed in Bosnia, and a shot has not been fired in anger since then. Bloodshed gave way to peace. It was a fragile peace, but a peace that prevented further loss of life. But over the last few months, the leader of Republika Srpska, Milorad Dodik, has put the Dayton Peace Agreement under enormous strain. He has long worked to systematically undermine the very instruments of stability that he is mandated as a Serb member of the presidency to protect. He has publicly repudiated the office of the UN Peacekeeper-in-Chief, the UN High Representative, threatened to withdraw Republika Srpska from federal institutions, threatened to withdraw Bosnian Serbs from the armed forces, the judiciary and the police forces. Meanwhile, he is significantly increasing military spending, militarising the police force, holding illegal Independence Day celebrations, showing off vast arrays of submarine guns. But what instigated the crisis we are seeing unfolding today? It is ultimately Dodik's refusal to stop his shameful and insidious campaign of genocide denial and glorification of war criminals. In July, the then High Representative banned the denial of the genocide that took place in Srebrenica. The war crimes that took place during the Bosnian War, and in particular in Srebrenica, are the most heinous committed on European soil since the Second World War. Under Milosevic, the ethnic cleansing of Bosnia was industrial and the motive clear: extermination. I believe this House is united, Madam Deputy Speaker, that what took place was a genocide. And it is important that we say that here, in this place, the mother of all parliaments. And it is also important that the UK and our Parliament should give the High Representative our full support in ensuring that any genocide law is implemented. Amid this backdrop, I hope it's abundantly clear to members already why the Dayton Peace Agreement must be upheld. There are some who have rightly noted that the Dayton Peace Agreements merely froze the results of the ethnic cleansing and didn't represent a true healing. I think we've probably all asked ourselves, should there not be a redrawing of the lines if it would bring down tensions? But this would be a grievous error. It would be to give ethno-nationalism, hatred and ethnic cleansing a victory, to say that communities can't coexist, that we will reward division and hatred as forms of negotiation, that the policies of ethnic cleansing in the 90s were not only successful, but now being mandated. I'm deeply concerned about reports that there's a growing opinion in Brussels, and even in America, that Bosnia and Herzegovina should be split, and Republika Srpska allowed to secede. Because if that is true, that is contrary entirely to the Dayton Peace Agreement, contrary to our principles that we share as members of the international community, and would in effect enshrine the results of the 1990s ethnic cleansing. Please, of course.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to the member giving way, and can I congratulate her on securing this very important debate. I agree with her what she's saying in terms of not redrawing boundaries that have been established for over 25 years. But would she also recognise one of the ways in which we can perhaps try to evolve the Dayton Agreement is to try to build up civil society in Bosnia, particularly on a multi-ethnic basis, and to encourage and support those voices to try to come together and to try to create more of a shared vision for Bosnia as an entirety, as a whole single entity.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and he is absolutely right. But in a chilling conversation this morning with the UN High Representative, who joins us today in the gallery, he said that civil society is not where it should be, that it is chilling how divided it is and how it is not able to bring people together. So yes, the Foreign Office should be looking at exactly how we support civil society. Indeed, all of our allies should. Now, there have also been increasing noises that the EU will also accept negotiation on genocide denial and electoral law, accommodating Dodik's appalling undermining of state institutions and stability. I hope the House will join me in condemning those sentiments without qualification, and that the Minister will make representations to her European Union counterparts that any such split would be unacceptable. Because no deal can be done so long as the threat of secession is used as a bargaining chip. I also wish to pause here to acknowledge that Dodik doesn't have unanimous support for his behaviour, and it's important that we don't internationally accept his position as representative of the will of Serbs and those Bosnian Serbs. There is opposition. Only a couple of weeks ago, he tried to pass some laws that would undermine the Dayton Agreement, and his majority unravelled. Now, before I turn to my ask of the Minister, I wish to thank her. I wish to thank my honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, the Defence Secretary, for their engagement on this situation over the last 2 months. I wish to put on record the alacrity with which they have responded to the concerns we have raised. I want to commend them for inviting the High Representative, Christian Schmidt, to the UK, for putting Bosnia on the agenda at the NATO Ministerial in Riga this week, for arranging 2 ministerial visits to Bosnia this week, and for this morning announcing a special envoy for the Western Balkans. But now to my further asks. I would urge the Minister to build on this track record urgently and raise the situation with her American counterparts, who only this morning for the first time tweeted saying that there were concerns about this. And yes, it's just a tweet, but words and diplomacy matter. Please, of course.
It's quite clear that on this point about international diplomacy, she's making a very important point. Would you also agree with me that obviously we need to put pressure on our allies in America and Europe? We also need to stand up to those in the wider world who are using this situation in Bosnia as a pawn and a bargaining chip in a greater play, and that we need to make sure that those countries also hear the voice of this chamber and of all of those in the Western Europe who would like to see stability maintained in the Western Balkans.
My old friend puts it very well, and I hope I can make the same point shortly as elegantly as he did. 73% of Republika Srpska exports go to the EU. So the UK and our EU partners can work to impose multilateral sanctions in line with those of our American allies. Even minimalist sanctions would have an impact, because we cannot accept a situation where pro-integrity forces are told that efforts to undermine the peace actually serve to further your negotiating position. Part of the reason that we are where we are today is a lack of clear, unambiguous pushback against secessionist politics from the international community. And if we don't push back now, Dodik and his enablers will be emboldened to escalate. The time for deterrence diplomacy is now. We talk about deterrence in terms of military things and military interventions, but deterrence can be a diplomatic effort, and that is something that we as the UK should lead on. The UK is also one of the world's best conveners, I'd say second to none when it comes to foreign policy. So I hope the government will use the immense experience of the Foreign Office to secure multilateral engagement and commitments to de-escalate by convening the NATO Quint, G7 foreign ministers and raising this at the UN Security Council to demonstrate that diplomacy can be an effective deterrent. Of course, please.
I totally endorse what my honourable friend is saying, and could I just perhaps encourage you to amplify this point? I get a sense of déjà vu from 30 years ago, when actually we looked the other way for too long, but involvement became inevitable. Would she actually emphasise that timeliness and promptness of any intervention is all the more important?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and that is why this debate today is so important. We as parliamentarians can raise the flare and ask the international community to sit up and take action now, not to wait until the first shot is fired. She is absolutely right. I would also ask the Minister that when she convenes the Quint, the G7, the UN partners, we secure an uplift to our personnel at NATO HQ in Sarajevo, and a joint exercise in the Balkans would also have much merit. I would also ask that as ethnic tensions rise, we activate the new UK conflict centre for which I lobbied and campaigned. It would map actors, identify those who are perpetrating identity-based violence, look at what multilateral activity is needed to prevent conflict, and act as an early warning system. I would also urge the government to create a cross-government counter-atrocity strategy for what's happening in Bosnia, but also in China and so many more places. And the Prime Minister has received an excellent letter on this from Protection Approaches, who are a fantastic charity. A strategy that would see us identify emerging tensions, early signs of human rights abuses, and trigger action before mass bloodshed. Now, one might ask, why does Dodik feel so emboldened to act in this way, as my colleague raised? Now, when threatening the succession of Republika Srpska, Dodik stated, "If anybody tries to stop us, we have friends who will defend us." Now, those friends, and they say you should judge a man by his friends, are Russia, Serbia, China, but even a handful of EU member states. Dodik himself has named Hungary, Slovenia, and even, in his words, the Brussels administration as having an understanding of his position. Now, some of these hostile states are using their influence to foment instability and ethnic tension, to distract from their own heinous actions at home, to secure their own territorial ambitions, or to feed instability in Europe's near neighbourhood. Now, Dodik has stated publicly, "When I go to Putin, there are no requests. He just says, 'What can I help with?' At this moment, Dodik is with Putin in Russia, and I fear what he is asking. And clearly he's going to receive whatever he asks for. Because Putin in the last few years has delivered semi-automatic weapons to Republika Srpska, 2,500 to be exact, that we know of. He has sent in his paramilitary motorcycle gang known as the Night Wolves to bring pro-secessionist messages to the streets of Bosnia. And China has steadily increased its presence, and Bosnia's international debt is now held by them. If we don't support Bosnia, it will find itself in the same situation as Montenegro, indebted and facing the reality of China's wolf warrior diplomacy as its loans come due next year. Dodik must learn that Bosnia also has friends, with none more committed to Bosnia's stability than the UK. And we must use deterrence diplomacy to demonstrate our resolve to stop autocrats making our neighbourhood their playground. So I would ask the Minister that we engage with Serbia and call on them to stop telling us behind the scenes that they want to prevent conflict and division, whilst in the same breath giving Dodik platform after platform after platform. That we engage heavily with Western Balkan nations to demonstrate that our eye is firmly on the region and to counter Russian and Chinese overtures towards them. Absolutely.
Thank my good friend on the progress you're making and the brilliant speech you're making. The question really is, in light of all the threats that Bosnia and Herzegovina is facing, would it help if we help to facilitate Bosnia joining NATO?
I think it would be unsurprising to remember that I fully agree that we should be doing that. However, we also have to recognise that for Russia, that is one of their greatest concerns, one of their greatest fears, which is why they're acting to undermine in the way that they are. But yes, NATO is more achievable in terms of membership than the EU membership. So let us stand and fight for that. Now, we know that as part of their support to Dodik, the Russians and even the Chinese and the Serbians are spreading disinformation within Bosnia. We know that the UK is a world leader in countering disinformation, particularly that of Putin. During my time in the Foreign Office, we exposed his devious disinformation networks, knocked him off balance and countered his lies. As a result, I'm on a no-fly list. I take that as success. We know how to counter Russia's disinformation, and we should be doing more of it. So I would urge the Minister to consider establishing a NATO counter-disinformation capability at NATO HQ in Sarajevo. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a cost to inaction, and that cost would be felt in Bosnia, throughout Europe, and most certainly here in the UK. And it would be felt by our veterans who gave so much, witnessed appalling atrocities while serving in Bosnia. Were conflict to reignite between communities in Bosnia, I can think of no greater recruiting sergeant for the far right or Islamists, and that would be across the world. As in the 1990s, bloodshed would displace thousands of people, and we would need to respond with boots on the ground. Peace in Bosnia is not just a moral imperative, but a security necessity for all of us in this place. Now, I'd like to say that I'm heartened to see so many colleagues here today united in our resolve, and I thank you all. And I'm grateful that so many took the time this morning to meet with the High Representative to show our support for his office and the work of the international community. Madam Deputy Speaker, I finished by saying that in 1992, the world moved too slowly. 3 years of bloodshed stained the Western Balkans and our collective conscience. It was a failure of the international community then, and we cannot accept a failure of the international community now. As we establish ourselves as global Britain, let us make one of our great acts of foreign policy to be to de-escalate tensions in the Balkans. Let us prove what we as the United Kingdom can do. And I hope by speaking with a clear voice today, our Parliament is making clear that we stand by our duty to the people of Bosnia, that peace in Bosnia will remain a priority for us, that the time for deterrent diplomacy is now, and that violence in Bosnia is most certainly not inevitable. Thank you.